Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly into a very different kind of morning, one that belongs to you, a scribe in ancient Egypt. Imagine your eyelids cracking open, not to the buzz of an alarm clock or the glow of a phone screen, but to the faint light creeping through mud brick walls, the Nile's breath drifting through a reed-covered window. The air smells faintly of clay dust, baked earth, and yesterday's bread. You're not waking in a palace, nor in a hut thatched with straw, but somewhere in between. A modest home, snug enough to keep you safe, yet humble enough to remind you daily that status here is fragile, even for a man of letters. And here's your quick, slightly inconvenient reality check. You probably wouldn't survive this version of morning in Egypt. Between parasites in the water, occasional sandstorms, and neighbors loudly pounding grain before sunrise, sleep quality was not exactly rated 5 stars. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stretch, your back crackling a little from sleeping on a woven mat stuffed with straw. Not quite a memory foam mattress, but it keeps you from the bare floor. The ceiling is low, made of wood and mud plaster, and you can hear chickens clucking faintly outside. There's also the soft bleat of a goat, somebody's alarm system in livestock form. You blink against the early sun, already golden on the Nile. Your clothes for the day are simple. A fresh linen kilt, still stiff from being washed and dried in the hot Egyptian air. Linen is the fabric of choice, light, breathable, perfect for weather that doesn't believe in mercy. If you were a wealthier scribe working in a top temple, maybe you'd have a touch of pleated linen for style, or even a small dab of perfumed oil to keep mosquitoes at bay. But you're in the middle ranks, respectable, literate, trusted, but still working for your grain rations and the hopes of stability. The floor beneath you is cool clay. A faint chalky dust sticks to your toes as you shuffle. Outside, neighbors are already up, pounding barley in stone mortars. The thump-thump is as rhythmic as a heartbeat. Egypt never really sleeps, it just dozes. And in your profession, the day begins early, because words and numbers have no patience for lazy scribes. You splash your face with water from a ceramic jar, stored cool in the corner. The water tastes faintly of silt. It always does, but it wakes you up. You pat your face dry with a scrap of cloth. If you were wealthy, you might have a servant for this. If you were poor, you wouldn't even have jars big enough to hold water overnight. You're somewhere in between, once again. As you glance around your quarters, you notice the small details that mark your life. A writing palette, smoothed by years of use, lies on a shelf. The reed pens bundled like a clutch of straw. Next to it, cakes of black and red pigment wait for mixing. The red is used sparingly for headings, divine names, or warnings. The black, black is your bread and butter. Literally, the ink that pays for your bread and butter. Papyrus scraps lie neatly rolled, some covered with half-finished tallies, others blank, begging for words. Here's a mainstream fact to ground you. Scribes were considered vital in ancient Egyptian society. Without them, the state couldn't function. No taxes collected, no temple rituals recorded, no royal orders preserved. Literacy was rare, which made your role both prestigious and precarious. You were the voice of permanence in a land where most voices vanished with the wind. But tucked into this prestige is a quirky little tidbit. Some scribes wrote practice lines like schoolchildren, repeating phrases such as, "A scribe's life is better than a soldier's life," over and over. Imagine being forced to copy motivational posters for hours. It was propaganda with ink stains, designed to remind you that sitting at a desk all day was preferable to getting skewered in battle. Whether you believed it after the 10th repetition? Questionable. Historians still argue whether scribes truly enjoyed elevated social freedom or if their status was more symbolic than practical. You had access to temples, palaces, and administrative offices, yes, but you were also tethered to bureaucratic duty. Some scholars see you as a minor elite, others as glorified clerks with better handwriting. The truth is probably somewhere in between, much like your life itself. Stepping outside, the early morning is cool, just barely. The Nile glitters in the distance, a wide band of liquid light, feeding the land and, indirectly, your stomach. Palm fronds sway gently in the breeze, their shadows like stripes across the ground. You take a slow breath, pulling in the mix of damp river smell, smoke from morning hearths, and the faint tang of dung. Because, let's be honest, the ancient world didn't come with scented candles. The mud brick houses around you are clustered tightly, like sun-dried Lego blocks. Their flat roofs hold jars, baskets, and the occasional cat prowling for pigeons. Cats, by the way, are not just beloved companions here, but also practical mouse hunters. You've probably left a bowl of scraps out for one or two of them, partly for their company, partly so your papyrus rolls don't get nibbled by vermin. A neighbor calls a greeting as she balances a basket of bread on her head. Kids chase each other barefoot down the alley, shrieking with the kind of energy only children can muster before breakfast. A donkey brays as if joining in. You roll your shoulders, feeling the weight of the day ahead, but also the quiet pride of belonging to this rhythm of life. Your walk to the office, or to the temple, depending on the day, will soon begin. For now, though, you're still in that sleepy space between waking and moving, between being just a man in a linen kilt and stepping into the role of a scribe. You're a bridge between ink and eternity, between the chatter of your neighbors and the silent permanence of hieroglyphs. And as the sun creeps higher, you can't help but smile faintly at the irony. You are about to spend your day recording other people's lives, grain counts, rituals, names of gods, while your own life hums quietly in the background, stitched together by bread, water, ink, and the eternal flow of the Nile. Your stomach growls, reminding you that the day cannot begin on an empty belly. Breakfast is not elaborate, it never is, but it's steady, filling, and designed to keep you writing through the long hours ahead. You shuffle back inside, where a low clay table holds what passes for your morning feast. A round of flat bread, baked yesterday but still pliable enough to tear, and a jug of beer. Not the hoppy golden stuff people clink glasses over in modern bars, but a thick, porridge-like brew, cloudy and gently sour. It's more liquid bread than beverage, safer to drink than plain Nile water, and yes, it doubles as a mild breakfast buzz if you're not careful. You tear the bread into pieces, dipping it in the beer, chewing slowly. The bread is coarse, sometimes gritty with bits of sand from grinding stones. A joke you often hear is that Egyptian dentists made good money simply because the bread itself ground people's teeth down. You smile wryly as you crunch. It's not a joke if it's true. A few onions sit nearby, pungent and sharp. You slice one, adding it to your meal. Onions are a staple, cheap and energizing, though not exactly romantic if you were planning on whispering sweet nothings to anyone after work. Still, with onion on your breath and bread in your belly, you feel fortified. This simple combination, bread, beer, onion, wasn't just your diet. It was Egypt's survival kit, eaten by everyone from the lowest laborer to temple scribes like yourself. Here's a mainstream fact to chew on. Bread and beer were considered wages in ancient Egypt. Workers at Deir el-Medina, the village of tomb builders, received rations of both instead of coins. To be paid in bread wasn't degrading, it was the baseline of life. And you, with your literate hand, enjoyed slightly better rations than most, maybe some figs or fish tossed in as well. As you nibble a fig, sticky sweet and fresh from the market, you remind yourself that not every scribe had such a comfortable start to the day. Those stationed in remote areas, border forts, desert expeditions, sometimes ate dried dates and whatever they could pack in. You're fortunate to be near the Nile with steady access to food. A quirky tidbit, beer jars often doubled as ancient lunchboxes. People sealed food inside with clay stoppers, letting beer and provisions ride together. It wasn't uncommon to uncap your beer and discover a small meal tucked beneath the froth. You glance at your jug, half wishing for that little surprise, though today yours holds only liquid. You sip, feeling the mild fizz tingle on your tongue. The flavor is earthy, almost bready, with the sourness of fermented grain. It fills your belly and gives you a gentle lift. This is what Egyptians drank from morning to night, including children, though their versions were watered down. No Starbucks, no tea kettles, just this malty, bubbling constant. Historians still argue whether the beer of ancient Egypt was truly intoxicating or if the lower alcohol content meant it was mostly just food in liquid form. Some papyrus texts describe drunken festivals that suggest beer packed a punch. Others suggest you'd have to drink gallons to stumble. The truth may be somewhere in the middle, an everyday staple that could also, in excess, loosen tongues and blur hieroglyphs. As you eat, you listen to the village around you. A neighbor shouts at her donkey, trying to coax it toward the fields. A child sings a repetitive little chant, probably some school exercise. Someone pounds grain again, the steady rhythm blending with the buzz of morning insects. It's the soundscape of a civilization at work, each note woven into a symphony that's lasted thousands of years. You reach for a piece of dried fish, salted until stiff. The taste is sharp, briny, but pairs perfectly with the bread. Protein for the mind, so to speak. As a scribe, your job doesn't require hauling stones or rowing boats, but it does demand endurance of a different sort. Sitting, focusing, shaping each hieroglyph with exactness. A tired body can't keep a steady hand. Breakfast is your safeguard. Between bites, your mind drifts. You recall lessons drilled into you at the temple school. A scribe is well fed, for his words bring him bread. The masters weren't lying. While other men broke their backs in the fields or risked their necks in the army, you write, and because of that, you eat. It's hard not to feel a little smug, though you'd never admit it aloud. Another onion slice crunches under your teeth. You wince slightly. Raw onions always hit hard. But you remind yourself they're considered medicinal too. Egyptians believed onions could ward off illness, purify the body, and even revive the faint. Priests placed onions in tombs as offerings. Somewhere out there, a pharaoh might be resting eternally with a small onion bulb for company. You chuckle softly. Imagine explaining that to someone today. My afterlife starter pack includes onions. Still, there's a certain poetry in it. Life so bound to simple food that you carry it beyond death. As you finish the meal, you lick crumbs from your fingers and wipe your hands on a strip of linen. The jug is nearly empty, the bread just crumbs. You feel full, ready. Your body hums with quiet energy, the kind that carries you through hours of sitting still. Outside, the sun is rising higher, painting the mud brick walls in warm gold. A breeze carries the smell of fresh-baked bread from a neighbor's oven. Your mouth waters again, though you're satisfied. A nearby rooster crows, late to the party, but insistent all the same. You think about the thousands of mornings just like this, stretching back generations. Your father probably ate the same breakfast. His father before him too. Bread and beer, beer and bread. The foundation not just of your day, but of Egypt itself. Kingdoms rose and fell, Pharaohs marched to war, temples gleamed with gold. But every morning, somewhere along the Nile, someone chewed coarse bread and drank cloudy beer. It's continuity, edible and undeniable. And so, with your belly settled, you stand, brushing the dust from your linen. The day ahead will be long, with lines to copy, numbers to tally, and maybe a quarrel or two to record. But for now, you are simply a man who has eaten, a scribe who has fueled yourself for the endless dance of reed pen across papyrus. You step outside again, squinting into the sun. The Nile glimmers in the distance, promising more than just water, promising life, and reminding you why this land has endured so long. With the taste of bread still lingering, you set off toward the bustling streets, the weight of your breakfast anchoring you to the flow of the day. The moment you step into the streets, the air changes. Inside your mud brick home, things were calm, shaded, and still. Out here, it's chaos wrapped in sunlight. The streets of your Egyptian town are alive with motion, narrow alleys crammed with vendors, animals, gossip, and the faint hum of the Nile not far away. Dust swirls at your ankles as you weave into the crowd, clutching your writing kit under one arm like a prized possession. The street itself is little more than packed earth, uneven and pitted with the grooves of countless sandals. Mud brick walls rise on either side, patched in places where cracks have been stuffed with straw. Some doorways are propped open, revealing flashes of domestic life. A woman kneading dough, children chasing a stray dog, an old man dozing in the shade with flies buzzing around him. You move past, careful not to bump anyone too roughly. Your ears are instantly overwhelmed. A man shouts about fresh dates, his voice competing with a woman hawking garlic bulbs. A donkey brays so loudly you wonder if it's trying to outsing the vendors. Somewhere farther down, a coppersmith hammers away at a pan, each clang ringing out like a temple gong. It's not exactly peaceful, but there's a strange comfort in it. You belong to this noisy, thriving system. Egyptian cities and towns were bustling hubs, often centered around markets. Goods from Nubia, the Levant, and across the Mediterranean found their way into stalls and storerooms. Spices, wood, oils, even rare lapis lazuli, most of it passed through these streets in some form. While you, as a scribe, don't exactly shop for luxury, you know that your city pulses with trade routes that connect you to distant lands. You step around a goat tethered loosely near a doorway, its eyes half closed, as if it's meditating on the meaning of hay. A boy darts in front of you, chasing the goat with a stick. You lift your kilt slightly to keep it clean from the dust and sidestep both of them, muttering something under your breath. The smells here are a cocktail. Fresh bread baking, fish, not so fresh, lying in baskets, smoke from dung-fueled fires, and of course, the unmistakable tang of animals, donkeys, cattle, goats, all leaving their signature on the ground. Your sandals crunch over dried droppings, and you sigh. Welcome to the glamorous life of a scribe. Ancient Egyptians sometimes sprinkled natron, a natural salt, on the ground to reduce smells in crowded areas. Not always successfully, but enough that certain streets had a faintly alkaline scent. You spot a small pile of white powder near a doorway and chuckle, knowing it's less about magic, more about trying to keep noses happy. Children swarm the streets, barefoot and noisy, playing games with pebbles and sticks. One group chants something sing-songy about crocodiles in the river. You catch a line and grin. It's basically an early warning rhyme. Egypt's way of teaching kids, stay away from the water's edge or you'll be dinner. The kids laugh like it's a joke, but you've seen enough Nile banks to know it's very much not. Historians still argue whether these towns were truly as bustling as modern imaginations suggest, or if we exaggerate their scale. Some believe streets were perpetually crowded. Others suggest bursts of activity at certain hours, like morning markets or festival days. Either way, you feel the press of humanity now, every step weaving around someone or something. A man with a tray of figs brushes past, nearly clipping your elbow. "Sweet figs, best price," he calls, waving one dangerously close to your face. You shake your head politely and keep walking. You've already had breakfast, and besides, figs in the sun tend to attract more flies than buyers. You notice a small procession coming your way, priests carrying offerings to a nearby temple. They walk solemnly, balancing trays of bread, flowers, and a jug of beer. The crowd parts for them, respectful. You pause as well, bowing your head slightly. Their linen is whiter, their scent tinged faintly with incense. For a brief moment, amidst the donkey brays and shouting vendors, silence hangs around the priests. Then, just as quickly, the clamor swallows them again. You resume your walk, sidestepping a merchant's display of clay jars. They're stacked precariously, each painted with simple designs. You wince at the thought of bumping them. One accident and you'd owe more grain than your monthly ration. Better to keep your elbows tucked in and your eyes forward. Overhead, the sun climbs higher, already hot. You wipe sweat from your brow. Shade is a luxury here. Buildings don't rise tall enough to block much light. A few awnings of woven reeds offer cover for shopkeepers, but you're exposed. You mutter under your breath about the sun god Ra being a little too enthusiastic today. Then laughter erupts from a stall nearby. A man is telling a story, gesturing wildly, his audience doubled over. You catch only the punchline. Something about a crocodile mistaking a sandal for food. You smirk. Crocodiles again. They're Egypt's version of slapstick comedy and nightmare fuel rolled into one. As you near the edge of the market, the crowd thins slightly. The road widens, leading toward official buildings and temple grounds. The noise fades to a background hum, replaced by the more purposeful stride of men like you. Clerks, guards, officials, all heading to their posts. You breathe easier, the chaos behind you, though part of you knows you'll hear echoes of it all day in your mind. One last glance back, and you see the swirl of Egypt's lifeblood, trade, gossip, animals, children, priests. A mess to the untrained eye, but to you, it's a kind of order. Every shout, every barter, every smell part of the grand engine that feeds the Nile Valley. And you, with your reed pen and jars of ink, are about to step into your role of making sure it's all written down, remembered, filed away in the ink of eternity. So you straighten your shoulders, clutch your writing kit a little tighter, and continue forward, leaving the bustling streets behind for the quiet, exacting world of the scribe. Your sandals scuff against the dusty path as the noise of the market fades behind you. Ahead, the broad courtyard of the temple stretches open, its stone walls cool against the blazing sun. You've walked this route many times before, and every time the sight tugs at something inside you, a mixture of pride, respect, and just a hint of intimidation. Because within these walls, you learn to do what sets you apart from nearly everyone else in this town. You learned to write. The temple school is not a place of play or leisure. It's not the kind of classroom with doodles on the margins or paper airplanes sailing through the air. No, this is where discipline was carved into you, stroke by stroke, just like the hieroglyphs you painstakingly copied. You pass through the gates, the smell of incense lingering, and memories of those early days come rushing back. You see it clearly in your mind, seated cross-legged on the floor, each clutching a piece of broken pottery or a wooden tablet. Papyrus was far too valuable to waste on learners, so practice began on whatever surfaces could be spared. You remember the way your reed pen scratched unevenly at first, blotting ink, smearing signs until your hands were stained black and red. The master walked the rows, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, quick to notice a mistake. A mainstream fast education was notoriously rigorous. Students began young, sometimes as early as 5 or 6, and were drilled daily in hieroglyphs, hieratic script, and later the faster demotic forms. It wasn't enough to learn symbols. You memorized whole texts, reciting them aloud until they were etched into your memory as firmly as ink into papyrus. Literacy was rare, and this training was the gatekeeper. You remember the sternness of the overseers. A crooked line earned you more than just a correction. It earned you a rap across the knuckles with a reed. It stung, sharp and humiliating. You learned quickly that precision was survival. The rhythm of your childhood was the rhythm of pen strokes and reed smacks. Still, there were moments of levity. A quirky tidbit: scribal students often copied phrases that were more moral lesson than language drill. Lines like, "The scribe's path is better than the farmer's path," or "Writing makes you remembered," appeared over and over. Some exercises even bordered on sarcasm. A farmer has mud on his feet. A scribe is clean. You chuckle now, imagining your younger self rolling his eyes while dutifully repeating a propaganda. The masters called it wisdom. You called it tedium. Historians still argue whether this scribal training was open to any boy with potential or restricted mostly to the children of scribes and officials. Some evidence suggests there were rare cases of talent rising from humbler families, while other research points to a closed loop of hereditary education. You like to think your own skill was enough to earn your place, but in truth, the ink on your father's hands probably paved the way. You recall the long days of practice, your knees stiff from sitting cross-legged for hours. The temple school wasn't generous with breaks. Lessons began at dawn and stretched until the light faded. You copied hymns to the gods, spells from funerary texts, even sections of wisdom literature meant to shape your character as much as your penmanship. One phrase still lingers in your memory: "Do not be idle, or poverty will come upon you like a thief." At the time, you muttered under your breath that poverty was already sitting next to you, chewing on stale bread. But you endured. Each day, your hand grew steadier. Your eyes learned to see not just the shape of a glyph, but its rhythm, its life. Hieroglyphs are more than pictures. They're fragments of gods, animals, people, and objects, stitched together to capture the world. At first, they felt overwhelming, like a puzzle with 1,000 tiny pieces. But slowly, they became a second language, one your fingers spoke fluently even when your lips stayed silent. Walking across the courtyard now, you glance at an older student sitting in the shade, bent over a tablet. His lips move as he mutters the words he copies, pausing occasionally to frown at a crooked line. You smile, remembering your own struggles, your own smudged hands. You almost want to tell him it gets easier, but then again, does it? Even now, years later, a single misplaced stroke can mean disaster. The lesson never ends. The temple itself looms ahead, its walls carved with scenes of gods and kings. You remember tracing those carvings as a child, mimicking their lines on your tablet, imagining that your hand was steady enough to match stone. The masters would shake their heads, reminding you that the pen is not the chisel. But in your mind, the two crafts were kin, both aimed at eternity, both striving to outlast the body that made them. One particular memory rises unbidden. You were perhaps 12, tasked with copying a hymn to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Your reed pen trembled as you tried to keep your lines straight, your ink from blotting. The master hovered, frowning. But when he read your work, his eyebrows lifted just slightly. "Not bad," he muttered. Those two words carried you for weeks, filling you with the quiet fire that maybe, just maybe, you belonged in this world of ink and order. Another memory, falling asleep during lessons, your head drooping onto your tablet. The sting of a reed whip woke you, and the laughter of your peers burned hotter than the welt on your skin. You swore never to embarrass yourself again, and from then on, you learned to endure exhaustion, hunger, and aching knees without complaint. The truth is, your training was not just about letters. It was about molding discipline, patience, and loyalty to the system. A scribe wasn't merely a writer. He was the engine of bureaucracy, the invisible hand that kept temples, fields, and armies running. To falter in your lessons was to falter in Egypt's heartbeat itself. You pass a shaded corner where a group of novices now huddle, reciting lines aloud in unison. Their voices rise and fall, a sing-song chant, like a strange choir praising not gods, but grammar. You pause for a moment, listening. Their voices overlap, one boy louder than the others, another stumbling behind. You smile, exactly as it was in your day. The memory makes you grateful. Grateful that you survived the years of repetition, the endless copying, the sharp sting of correction. Grateful that now, when you take up your pen, you no longer fear every stroke. Instead, you feel the calm of mastery, the quiet pride of one who has passed through fire and emerged ink-stained but steady. And so you continue walking, past the memories of your youth, past the novices and their chanting, toward your destination. The tools of your trade wait for you. The day's work will soon begin. But a small part of you, deep inside, will always remain that boy in the temple school, scratching crooked lines on pottery, eyes watering from fatigue, dreaming of the day he would write words that mattered. You finally step into the cool interior of the scribal chamber, and the difference from the noisy streets outside feels almost shocking. The walls are plain plaster, the light softer, filtering through narrow slits high above. Here, there is no braying donkey, no onion seller yelling for attention, just the smell of ink, papyrus, and the faint musk of reed pens drying in their bundles. It's the smell of your profession, the perfume of order and permanence. Your writing tools sit waiting for you, simple yet miraculous in their way. You reach for the wooden palette, its shallow depressions still holding dried cakes of pigment. Black for daily work, contracts, lists, correspondence. Red reserved for headings, for divine names, for moments when the text itself needs to pause and announce importance. You take your jar of water and moisten the pigments, swirling gently until they loosen into glossy pools. The black ink looks like river mud, thick and opaque. The red gleams faintly like rust, as though carrying within it the memory of the desert. You pluck a reed pen from the bundle. They are cut from river reeds, their tips shaped into fine points with a careful slice of a knife. A good reed is a treasure. You've spent long evenings trimming and smoothing them, ensuring the fibers split just enough to hold ink, but not so much that they fray. You roll the reed between your fingers, feeling its balance, its readiness. Some scribes say you can tell a man's character by the way he holds his pen. Yours sits steady, light, as natural as a third hand. Egyptian scribes relied on reed pens and papyrus as their daily companions. Papyrus, made from the pith of Nile reeds, was both durable and flexible, forming sheets that could be rolled, folded, or glued into long scrolls. Its production was a guarded craft, one of Egypt's most valuable exports. The combination of papyrus and ink allowed Egyptians to record in ways that outlasted clay tablets or wooden planks used elsewhere. But there are quirks to your toolkit as well. For instance, fragments of ostraca, broken pottery shards, still litter the floor around your bench. These serve as scratch paper, the ancient equivalent of sticky notes. Need to jot down a quick calculation, a list, or a draft before committing to papyrus? Grab a shard. Some of your best practice doodles live on the backs of smashed amphorae. You grin at the thought. Modern archaeologists will one day find your grocery lists on pottery scraps and wonder if they were coded messages. Historians still argue whether scribes had personal ownership of their tools or if everything was temple-issued. Some evidence suggests that master scribes guarded their palettes like prized heirlooms, while others point to communal supplies in scribal schools. In your case, your kit feels like an extension of yourself. Lose it, and you'd feel naked, like a soldier without a sword. You unroll a piece of papyrus, smoothing it flat with the palm of your hand. The fibers run in neat crisscross layers, faint ridges beneath your touch. The sheet has a faint grassy smell, reminding you of its origins on the banks of the Nile. You dip your reed into the black ink, twist it slightly to catch the liquid, and exhale slowly. The first stroke is always the hardest, even after years of practice. Will your hand shake? Will the ink blot? You steady yourself, pressing lightly, dragging the reed in a crisp curve. The ink flows smoothly, sinking into the papyrus without bleeding. A small sigh escapes your lips. Still steady, still true. On your bench sits a small box of pigments beyond the usual black and red, yellow ochre, green malachite powder, a touch of blue ground from rare lapis. You don't use them often, but when illustrating manuscripts or decorative headings, they transform words into art. You remember once painting a tiny falcon in lapis blue, its feathers glowing like the sky, only to have a colleague remark it looked more like a startled duck. You laughed, then quietly vowed never to attempt falcons in blue again. The quiet of the chamber is soothing. Other scribes murmur occasionally, scratching away at their own papyri. The room hums with concentration. The sound is not silence, it is the faint rasp of reeds, the occasional cough, the soft splash of water jars. You lean into it, feeling the rhythm of work settle over you. There is something intimate about your tools, almost sacred. The reed pens wear down quickly, their tips softening after hours of use. You bite them gently to sharpen the fibers, spitting out the frayed ends. It's not glamorous, but it works. A new reed always feels stiff, almost untrustworthy. An old reed, worn in by your grip, feels like a friend. You pause, stretching your fingers. The joints already ache a little, and it's still early. Writing may not demand heavy lifting, but it demands endurance. Your fingers cramp, your back stiffens, your eyes blur from squinting at tiny details. Sometimes you envy the farmers their open skies and movement, even as you remind yourself you'll never blister under the sun as they do. Different pains, different costs. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Scribes sometimes scribbled little caricatures of animals or people in the margins of practice texts. These doodles served no purpose but to break the monotony. You've done it too, once sketching a cat chasing a goose across the edge of a grain tally. The overseer didn't notice, or pretended not to. Perhaps he understood that even scribes need their amusements. As you continue, you recall the lessons drilled into you during your training. Ink is permanence. Once it dries, it cannot be erased. A mistake means more than wasted papyrus. It means embarrassment, even punishment. Every stroke must be deliberate, measured. The weight of that responsibility presses on you, yet also fills you with quiet pride. You are not just scratching symbols, you are preserving meaning, weaving memory into fiber. And as you look down at your tools, the palette, the pigments, the reeds, you realize they are both humble and mighty. Humble because they are simple, made of river reeds and earth. Mighty because with them you capture the voice of kings, the will of gods, the heartbeat of a civilization. The street noise still lingers faintly in your ears, but here in this chamber, with reed in hand and papyrus spread before you, the world feels narrower, calmer. Your tools are your anchor, your companions, your proof that you are more than just another man walking the crowded alleys. You are a scribe, and your ink is Egypt's memory. The papyrus lies before you, blank yet humming with possibility. You dip your reed into the black ink once more, and this time you're not copying grain tallies or a neighbor's property dispute. Today, you're entrusted with something heavier, transcribing sacred hymns. Words not meant merely for officials or farmers, but for the gods themselves. You inhale slowly. Even after years in the craft, the responsibility prickles at the back of your neck. The chamber quiets further when such work begins. Your fellow scribes lower their voices, the scrape of reeds softening as if even the tools themselves are cautious. The smell of incense drifts in from the temple beyond, curling in faint tendrils that mingle with the earthy scent of papyrus. You straighten your back, steady your hand, and begin. Amun-Ra, the sun god. Each glyph must be precise. The falcon-headed figure, the sun disk, the zigzag line for water. You copy with slow reverence, careful not to smear the ink. A careless stroke in a shopping list might cost you a reprimand. A careless stroke in a sacred hymn? That might feel like tempting divine wrath. Scribes were often responsible for preserving religious texts, from hymns to rituals to funerary spells, like those in the Book of the Dead. These writings guided priests in ceremonies and promised safe passage to the deceased in the afterlife. Without scribes, the sacred would remain fleeting words spoken aloud, vanishing into the air. With you, they endure. The chant of the novices drifts faintly through the corridor. Their voices rise and fall, echoing like waves, repeating phrases of devotion. You match your strokes to their rhythm, letting their cadence steady your hand. It's almost musical, the flow of ink and voice together. You reach for the red pigment, reserved for the divine name. The moment feels delicate, ceremonial. You rinse your reed, dip it lightly, and inscribe the glowing symbol for Ra. Red on papyrus, it looks like fire caught in fibers. The gods' names demand respect, even in color. Here's a quirky tidbit. Scribes sometimes inserted tiny mistakes in less important documents intentionally, a way of ensuring they couldn't be used in rituals. But when it came to sacred texts, perfection was the rule. Even so, archaeologists have found papyri where divine names are written slightly differently, suggesting scribes may have disagreed or experimented when depicting the gods. Imagine debating the proper spelling of your deity's name and hoping you didn't offend. Historians still argue whether scribes themselves were considered holy men or simply functionaries working under priestly supervision. Some evidence shows scribes doubling as temple administrators, enjoying a measure of sacred authority. Others suggest they were viewed as mere recorders, vital but not sanctified. You like to think your hand, tracing the God's words, is touched with at least a little of that holiness, even if the priests keep most of the glory. The hymn continues, describing Ra's daily journey across the sky, his battle with darkness, his renewal at dawn. As you copy, you glance toward the narrow window. Outside, the sun climbs steadily, blazing just as the words describe. You can't help but smile at the symmetry. Ra's journey inked beneath your hand while his chariot blazes overhead. Your reed scratches slightly. You pause, trim the fibers with your knife, and resume. Every stroke must be crisp, every curve balanced. Hieroglyphs are not just language, they are art. The feather of Ma'at, symbol of truth, must be drawn with the same care you'd give to an actual feather. The seated God figure must have posture, dignity, a hint of life. Writing sacred texts is as much painting as it is spelling. The hours stretch quietly. Your hand aches, your shoulders stiffen, but you keep going. Each line you copy is a bridge carrying mortal devotion into eternity. You imagine the hymn being recited generations from now, long after your name is forgotten, your bones dust. Your work might still sing. For a moment, you drift into memory. You recall your first time allowed to copy a funerary spell. The papyrus was narrow, the room dark, and your hand trembled so badly the reed nearly slipped. But when you finished, the master nodded. "Now you carry souls," he said. It struck you then, the gravity of it. A farmer's grain tally feeds his family for a year. A scribe's funerary spell feeds a soul forever. You shake the thought away gently, returning to the hymn. The priests may chant it today, a noble may hear it tomorrow, but the gods, if they listen, will hear it always. That is why you cannot falter. A colleague across the chamber coughs softly, breaking the spell for a moment. He mutters about his reed fraying again, and you smirk. Even sacred work comes with mundane annoyances. You lean over to whisper a quick joke, something about Ra himself burning through reeds just to test your patience. Your colleague chuckles under his breath, then returns to his work. Even in reverence, humor keeps you human. The hymn nears its end. You switch once more to red ink for the final invocation, the symbols glowing against the papyrus. You set the reed down gently, flex your stiff fingers, and exhale. Another fragment of eternity complete. The papyrus will be rolled carefully, stored in the temple archive, perhaps read aloud during rituals. Maybe it will be buried with a noble, tucked among amulets and food offerings. Or maybe, centuries later, it will lie forgotten in the sand until someone unearths it. You wonder if the archaeologists of the future will marvel at your steady hand, or laugh at the tiny smudge where your reed once slipped. You smile faintly at the thought. Sacred or not, each page you copy carries both the weight of the gods and the small traces of your humanity. Ink and divinity, bound together by the humble hand of a scribe. The hymn scroll is carefully set aside, and your hand, still tingling from the effort, reaches for a different piece of papyrus. The work changes now, less lofty than divine invocations, yet just as vital to the machinery of daily life. Today, you must record a shipment of grain delivered from nearby farms. It is hardly poetic, but it is the bread and butter of Egypt's power. Grain keeps soldiers marching, temples functioning, and families fed. Without these dry lists of numbers, kings' dreams would wither into dust. You spread the papyrus sheet and dip your reed once more, the black ink glistening on its tip. The farmer who delivered this shipment waits outside, probably sweating nervously, hoping his measure was deemed fair. You will determine whether he walks away content or with a fine. That is the peculiar power of the scribe. Though you wield no sword, though your arms are thin compared to a soldier's, your strokes can cut deeper. You jot down the farmer's name, his village, the number of sacks unloaded. Each figure must be exact. If you record too little, the state loses food. Too much, and the farmer suffers unjustly. Your numbers are the balance between trust and suspicion. Egypt's wealth rested heavily on agriculture, with grain as its core resource. The Nile's yearly flood fertilized the soil, making Egypt a breadbasket not just for itself, but later for the wider Mediterranean. Scribes like you were essential for managing the massive bureaucracy that tracked harvests, taxes, and distribution. These records ensured temples, officials, and the military received their due. But behind the neat columns of grain tallies, there are quirks too. Sometimes farmers tried to cheat, slipping stones or sand into sacks to make them heavier. Others, more daring, might bribe low-level overseers to look the other way. Of course, everyone knows scribes aren't above suspicion either. A clever scribe might exaggerate numbers in favor of his friends or trim a little for himself. You, of course, would never, at least not in ways that could be proven. Historians still argue whether most scribes came from humble origins or whether the position was effectively reserved for elite families. Some argue scribal schools were open to talented boys regardless of birth, while others suggest that connections mattered far more than skill. You like to think your long hours of training earned you the position, but sometimes you notice how easily certain well-connected classmates advanced compared to you. Merit, it seems, is not always the deciding ink stroke. The grain numbers continue to pile up, line after line. You add columns, adjust totals, and double-check your sums. Arithmetic is not glamorous, but it is steady, soothing in its rhythm. 1 sack, then 10, then 50. Each line is an invisible thread binding village to temple, farmer to pharaoh. Outside, you hear the grumble of an ox pulling away with an empty cart. Another farmer takes his place, shuffling nervously. You almost smile. This procession is endless. Just as the Nile flows, so too do these records. Your wrist aches again, but you press on, because Egypt does not run on prayers alone, it runs on numbers. You pause for a sip of water, noticing how the papyrus curls slightly at the edges in the heat. Your reed pen scratches faintly, leaving tiny flecks of ink where it's grown blunt. You trim it quickly, blow the fibers smooth, and continue. The ink flows darker again, lines neat and steady. Sometimes, though, the monotony gets the better of you. On a scrap of astrakhan nearby, you sketch a crude picture of a sack of grain sprouting legs and walking off. You grin at your little rebellion. If someone were to find it later, they might think it's symbolic, a metaphor for abundance, perhaps. In reality, it's just you fighting boredom. The overseer passes behind your bench, glancing at your work. He nods curtly, clearly satisfied that your numbers add up. You suppress the urge to roll your eyes. He'll probably claim credit later, as though his hovering made the ink flow straighter. You let it go. Scribes learn early that egos must be stroked as carefully as papyrus sheets. Your mind wanders briefly to the farmers whose names you record. Each one represents a family, a field, a life shaped by the Nile's moods. A good flood year brings plenty, a poor one brings hunger. And here you are, reducing all of that sweat and worry into tidy rows of symbols. It feels clinical, detached, yet necessary. Without your records, chaos would creep in, disputes multiplying, grain vanishing without trace. And of course, there are taxes. Many of these farmers dread your reed pen more than the scorching sun. You, after all, are the one who transforms grain into obligation. The state sees through your ink. Sometimes you almost pity the farmers. Then you remember that your work shields you from the plow and the whip. Pity is fleeting. Not all tallies were straightforward. Some records included strange annotations, drawings of birds, odd symbols, or jokes tucked between lines. Perhaps a bored scribe centuries ago doodled a goose in a grain list, much as you did today. Later scribes may have puzzled over these additions, wondering if they held secret meaning. Maybe one day someone will stare at your walking grain sack and declare it a religious symbol. The papyrus fills steadily. You glance at the neat black columns and feel a flicker of satisfaction. It may not sing like a hymn, but it has its own beauty. The orderliness of numbers, the clarity of balanced accounts. The world may forget the names of these farmers, but the tallies you make will endure. Silent testimony to Egypt's ceaseless labor. You place the finished sheet aside, stacking it with others destined for the archive. More papyri will follow, more farmers will shuffle in, more ink will flow. But for now, you allow yourself a moment of rest. You stretch your stiff shoulders, flex your sore fingers, and let your gaze drift toward the window where sunlight glitters on the Nile in the distance. The river shines like molten gold, endless and steady, just like your lists, just like your ink. The Nile floods, the grain grows, the farmers harvest, and you record, over and over, as predictable as the turning of the sun. In that cycle, there is comfort. You pick up your reed again. Another farmer waits, another line of ink, another small piece of Egypt's vast ledger. You smile faintly. This is the heartbeat of your nation, and it beats in strokes of black across papyrus. The grain tallies are safely stacked, and now your reed turns toward another kind of task, letters. Not love letters, though those certainly exist, but the kind that carry the weight of daily life. Messages between officials, notes from superiors, orders that ripple down from the pharaoh's court to the villages on the Nile's edge. A scroll of papyrus lies before you, its surface smoother than the rough practice sheets. This one isn't for scribbles or doodles, it's for words meant to travel. You dip your reed in black ink, the pigment shining wetly in the slanting light. Today's letter is from the local temple steward to the overseer of granaries several miles downstream. The subject? The inevitable, taxes. You sigh softly. Whether sacred or secular, grain always finds its way into the ink. You begin the formulaic opening, the polite words of greeting that must be copied exactly. Life, prosperity, health to you. The phrase is automatic, but it has a rhythm that feels almost like a blessing, even when followed by demands for bushels of barley. A mainstream fact, correspondence was a crucial function of scribes in ancient Egypt. Without them, communication between temples, villages, and the central government would collapse. These letters kept officials informed of harvests, shortages, building projects, or disputes. They were the nervous system of a sprawling civilization, and every scribe was a nerve ending, transmitting signals through ink. But here's the quirky reality. Not every letter was grand or official. Archaeologists have uncovered papyri with what can only be described as ancient complaint letters. One merchant furiously accused another of cheating him with bad copper. Another man begged a friend to return a borrowed cloak. There's even one where a husband scolded his wife for failing to send news home. Imagine writing with such seriousness, only for your irritation to be immortalized for millennia. You chuckle quietly, half wishing to slip a sarcastic line in today's formal letter. Something like, "May your accounts be as accurate as your aim after too much beer." But no, better not. Historians still argue whether most scribes wrote letters word for word under dictation, or whether they were given freedom to phrase the content as they pleased. Some evidence suggests formulaic openings and closings were rigid, but the middle could vary with the scribe's own flair. You prefer to believe that your hand adds a subtle personal style, small turns of phrase, little flourishes that make your letters more than mechanical copies. As you write, you picture the overseer opening this letter days from now. Perhaps he'll be annoyed at yet another demand for more grain shipments. Perhaps he'll nod and pass the order along. Either way, your words will carry across the river and into his hands, shaping his day, his work, maybe even his mood. It's strange, isn't it? You sit in a quiet chamber, yet your strokes reach miles away, carrying weight you may never see. The letter is long, full of specifics. Dates, amounts, warnings of penalties if quotas aren't met. You pause halfway, rubbing your fingers. This is where endurance matters again. Your hand cramps, but you push on. Ink, after all, does not flow without pain. A boy passes behind you, carrying a bundle of reeds for sharpening. He peeks over your shoulder and smirks at the repetitive lines. "Another tax letter?" he whispers. You roll your eyes. "Another reason farmers will curse our names," you mutter back. He laughs softly, then scurries on, leaving you with your thoughts. Once the main body is complete, you dip into red ink for emphasis. Certain phrases, penalties, the name of the temple. Red stands out like a warning flare. You imagine the overseer's eyes catching on those words first, just as planned. Some things never change. Red ink has always meant pay attention. You carefully roll the papyrus, tie it with cord, and dab it with a small lump of clay. The steward presses his seal into the clay, a tiny scarab symbolizing his authority. Without that seal, the letter is just ink. With it, the letter is power. It will travel by courier down the Nile, tucked into a satchel, bouncing with the rhythm of a donkey or swaying with the oars of a boat. You imagine the journey. Reed pens and papyrus transformed into orders that ripple outward, changing lives far from your desk. You reach for another sheet. This one is simpler. A message of thanks from a priest to a craftsman for timely delivery of temple doors. It is shorter, less stern, and even contains a little warmth. You enjoy these more. They remind you that letters are not just orders and complaints, but also bridges between people. You add a small flourish to the closing line, making the words feel less like formula and more like gratitude. Of course, not every letter you copy is noble. You once had to write for a nobleman who wanted to scold his brother for borrowing servants without permission. The noble dictated angrily, and you did your best to translate his temper into dignified phrasing. The result? A papyrus that read as though the gods themselves were offended by the loan of two men with shovels. You nearly laughed as you wrote it. Future readers will probably think it was a matter of great cosmic importance. Another quirky tidbit: some letters were so exaggerated in their courtesy that modern scholars suspect sarcasm. Imagine addressing someone with endless praise, most honored, most perfect, most splendid, when in fact you despised them. You can't help but think, yes, sarcasm is truly timeless. You finish the second letter, seal it, and place it with the first. The pile of correspondence grows slowly, destined for couriers and messengers. They will carry the weight of your ink into villages, temples, and offices across the land. Without those messengers, without your words, the whole bureaucracy would grind to a halt. You lean back, stretching your sore spine. Letters, tallies, hymns, they all blur together sometimes, a constant flow of ink across papyrus. But as you glance at the sealed scrolls, you feel a flicker of pride. These are not just scraps of fiber, they are lifelines, keeping Egypt's vast web of people connected. And perhaps, one day, some curious soul will dig these letters from the sand. They will unroll the brittle sheets, squint at your careful glyphs, and whisper translations under their breath. They will marvel that thousands of years ago, a scribe dipped his reed, sighed at the monotony, and wrote the very words they now hold. And they'll never know that you almost slipped a sarcastic joke about beer into the margins. You chuckle quietly at the thought, then set down your reed. The letters are done for now, ready to travel. Your words, though rooted in this quiet chamber, are already halfway across Egypt in your imagination. Ink, you realize again, is not just black marks on papyrus. It is movement. It is voice. It is reach. The morning wears on, and your stomach growls loud enough to earn a sideways glance from the scribe beside you. You give him a sheepish shrug, set your reed down, and finally allow yourself the break you've been craving. Work can wait for a moment. Even ink must pause for bread. You step outside into the glare of the midday sun. The shift from the dim, scribal chamber to the open courtyard is blinding at first, your eyes watering as you squint. Heat shimmers off the limestone walls, and the murmur of the city rises around you. It smells of dust, of sweat, and faintly, thank the gods, of food. Lunch is simple, as it always is. You join a few fellow scribes under a shaded awning, where a boy from the kitchens sets down baskets. Inside are round loaves of coarse barley bread, still warm from the clay oven, their crusts cracked and smoky. You tear one open, the soft interior steaming, and dip it into a small dish of lentil stew. The flavor is earthy, hearty, though not exactly refined. You chew slowly, savoring it anyway. Hunger makes all food taste better. Most Egyptians' diets were built around bread and beer. Bread provided the calories, beer the hydration and nourishment. Meat was rare for common people, usually reserved for feasts or offerings, though fish and fowl supplemented meals when available. For scribes, the diet was somewhat better than for farmers. You often received rations as part of your pay, sometimes including dates, onions, or even a cut of goat if you were lucky. Today, the basket also contains dried figs and a handful of onions. You bite into a fig, its sweetness cutting through the heaviness of bread and stew. Around you, the scribes chat quietly, voices low and weary from hours of writing. One jokes about how his reed has bitten him more times than his wife's nagging. You laugh, nearly choking on your bread. There's a comfort in these meals, a rhythm of camaraderie. You talk about nothing of consequence: the weather, the stubbornness of reeds, the absurdity of overseers. Work is rarely discussed. This pause is sacred in its own way, a moment to be human rather than merely a hand for ink. A quirky tidbit: Egyptians used crocodile fat and herbs as an early sunscreen. You once heard a farmer claim he smeared crocodile dung on his skin to keep the sun off. You and your friends still laugh about it whenever someone returns from the fields with a sunburn. Today, as you squint into the glare, you're almost tempted to try it. Almost. Historians still argue whether scribes dined separately from common workers or whether the lines blurred during casual meals. Some texts suggest scribes ate in private quarters, emphasizing their elite status. Others hint at shared meals in temple courtyards, where all staff mingled. Judging by the mix of people around you, scribes, junior priests, even a guard gnawing on bread, it seems both could be true, depending on the occasion. You wash down the bread with a sip of beer from a clay jug passed around the group. It's thick, almost porridge-like, with floating brains. Not exactly fine dining, but refreshing nonetheless. You wipe your mouth with the back of your hand and sigh. As you eat, you watch the courtyard. Novice scribes dart past, their reed bundles clutched tight. A priest scolds a boy for dropping a jar. In the corner, a cat prowls, tail twitching, hoping for a scrap. Life in the temple compound is never quiet, never still. Even in your break, the world hums with motion. Someone beside you pulls out an ostrakhan and begins sketching a crude drawing of a donkey carrying a mountain of grain. The group chuckles. Another adds a sun glaring angrily down on the beast. Soon, the shard is passed around, each man adding a small detail. Yours is a stick-figure scribe chasing the donkey with a reed pen like a spear. The shard ends up looking like the earliest cartoon strip. You grin, imagining some future archaeologist finding it and declaring it a ritual depiction of agricultural burdens. If only they knew. The bread is nearly gone, the beer jug empty. A few men stretch out lazily, reluctant to return to their benches. You feel the same tug. Your back longs for a nap in the shade. But duty, like the Nile, flows steadily and doesn't wait for weary shoulders. You stand, brushing crumbs from your linen. A stray cat darts forward to lick the last of the stew from the dish. You scratch behind its ears, earning a low purr, before heading back inside. The shift from blazing sun to cool chamber feels like diving into water. Your eyes adjust slowly. You return to your bench, the smell of ink greeting you again. Your belly is full, your throat quenched, and though your body aches, you feel steadier. Work may demand much, but at least it pauses long enough for bread and laughter. You pick up your reed, glance at the papyrus waiting, and exhale. Another stretch of the day begins. But for now, the memory of figs and jokes lingers like sweetness on your tongue. The midday meal leaves you satisfied, but your body craves movement after hours of sitting. You stretch your back, roll your shoulders, and let your gaze wander toward the temple courtyard. Outside, the day has grown hotter, and the hum of activity continues unabated. Farmers haul more sacks of grain, a cart rattles along uneven stone paths, and a group of children chase a stray duck in a dusty game of tag. Even in the height of work, life refuses to pause. You return to your bench and the papyrus awaiting your hand. This time, the work is more meticulous than the grain tallies or letters you handled earlier. You are tasked with drafting a legal document, a contract between two landowners concerning the shared use of irrigation channels. Water is precious here, far more so than gold in many cases, and disputes over it can spark bitterness that lasts generations. Your ink must translate into clarity and fairness. You dip your reed carefully, black pigment catching the light. Every stroke matters. Each glyph you write is not merely a letter, but a guarantee, a record that may protect one party or another. In your role, you are both arbiter and scribe, the invisible hand that ensures agreements are binding. Mistakes are costly. A misdrawn hieroglyph could tilt the scales. Scribes often served as mediators in legal matters, documenting property rights, contracts, and disputes. These records were essential in a civilization where land, water, and labor were tightly regulated, and the pharaoh's authority depended on accurate accounting. Without scribes, there would be chaos. Agreements would dissolve into rumor and conflict. The first paragraph is straightforward: names, titles, and the boundaries of the properties. You pause briefly to consider how to word the phrasing so it is unambiguous yet respectful. Your reed moves slowly, deliberately. The river of ink flows across the fibers, steady and black. Yet even legal work has room for quirks. Some scribes insert small doodles in the margins, tiny animals, decorative motifs, or symbols meant to ward off bad luck. You notice a faint drawing of a cat chasing a rat on a neighboring document. Perhaps it is a charm, or perhaps it is boredom speaking. You allow yourself a small grin and sketch a minuscule water jug in the corner, a quiet joke about the subject of your contract. Historians still argue whether these marginal drawings were purely personal flourishes or had symbolic significance. Some suggest they were meant to invoke protection or good fortune. Others believe they were just scribal amusement. Either way, they humanize the otherwise stern, precise records. As you continue, you pause to sip water from a small jar. The midday heat presses down, even within the temple's stone walls, and the effort of careful writing makes your throat dry. A slight breeze drifts through a slit in the wall, carrying dust and the faint aroma of lotus flowers from the courtyard garden. It is a small relief, a brief whisper of the natural world amid the discipline of ink and papyrus. The reed scratches the surface as you move to the next section of the contract. The other is responsible for clearing debris. The phrasing must leave no room for misinterpretation. You adjust your hand slightly, curling your fingers around the reed for better control, your wrist aching but steady. A quirky tidbit, some contracts included clauses that read like humor disguised as law. For instance, one might declare that a neighbor shall not allow his goat to wear a crown of weeds in the canal lest the river gods frown. You can imagine ancient scribes snickering as they copied such lines, maintaining the sacred tone while enjoying a private joke. Today, your clause is practical, but you allow a tiny flourish at the end of a sentence, a little twist of a line to keep your hand nimble. The legal text continues, the witnesses' names, the seals to authenticate the agreement. Each element is critical. A seal pressed into clay carries authority. A missing name could render the contract void. You work carefully, aware that your writing holds consequences beyond the chamber walls. You glance briefly at a fellow scribe who has just finished his own legal papyrus. He leans back, flexing his stiff fingers, eyes bright with the satisfaction of completion. You feel a similar surge of quiet pride. There is a certain meditative joy in rendering complex agreements into clear, precise symbols. It is not dramatic, not thrilling, but it is enduring. The afternoon sunlight shifts, illuminating the papyrus with a golden glow. Shadows stretch across the chamber, and you feel the rhythm of your day, ritualistic, measured, deliberate. The reeds, the ink, the papyrus, they are not just tools, they are companions, partners in the creation of permanence. You pause to consider the broader implications of your work. A farmer disputes his neighbor's access to water. A merchant awaits clarification on a shipment. A priest relies on correct offerings. Your hand, guided by training and experience, bridges the gap between potential chaos and structured society. Without your careful strokes, Egypt's intricate machinery of land, labor, and law might grind to a halt. Finally, the document is complete. You set the reed aside and lean back, stretching your fingers and shoulders. The contract will be sealed, stored, and perhaps read aloud in a temple court. One day, maybe centuries from now, some archaeologist will unroll the papyrus and marvel at your careful work, unaware of the quiet concentration, the aching wrist, or the minor doodle hidden in the margin. You allow yourself a small moment of satisfaction, knowing that the scribal day is far from over. Yet each completed sheet carries the weight of life, society, and law. You stand, glance toward the window, and breathe deeply, ready to return to the rhythmic, enduring task of preserving Egypt in ink. The shadows lengthen as the afternoon moves toward evening, and a hush settles over the scribal chamber. The intense heat of the sun outside softens, replaced by a gentler warmth that drifts through the slits in the limestone walls. You glance at your papyrus pile and feel the steady rhythm of the day. Lists tallied, letters written, legal contracts recorded. There is a quiet satisfaction in the accumulation of work, the tangible proof of your role in Egypt's machinery. Your reed hovers over a fresh sheet of papyrus, and this task is unlike any you have handled so far today. You are to copy a text of wisdom literature, words meant to guide behavior, preserve morality, and instruct future generations. The phrases have been repeated for centuries, yet each scribe's hand gives them a subtle new life. You feel the weight of tradition pressing gently on your wrist. A mainstream fact literature, often inscribed on papyri or wooden tablets, was central to Egyptian education. These texts, like the instructions of Ptahhotep, offered advice on how to live, work, and interact with others. They were memorized, copied, and used to cultivate not only literacy, but character. A scribe who mastered these texts gained both skill and social insight. You begin copying slowly. letting each glyph flow deliberately. The first lines speak of humility, patience, and respect. Do not boast of your knowledge, lest it betray you, the text reads. You trace the hieroglyphs carefully, mindful of their curves and angles. Your hand aches from the repeated motion, yet there is a meditative pleasure in precision. A quirky tidbit, some scribes would insert subtle visual puns or playful images within these texts, nearly invisible to the casual eye. A bird glyph might wink at a mischievous neighbor, or a tiny seated figure might be posed in a humorous stance. These additions were never officially acknowledged, yet they brought moments of levity to otherwise serious work. You consider doing the same, sketching a small cat chasing a fish at the corner of the page. It would be a private joke, a spark of personality amidst centuries of solemn advice. Historians still argue whether these small marginalia were intended as humorous commentary or had symbolic, even protective purposes. Either way, they reveal the human side of scribes, disciplined, yet capable of small rebellions of creativity. You smile at the thought, imagining your tiny flourishes surviving in the sands for thousands of years. Do not be hasty in speech, nor careless in deed. Observe the ways of your elders, and the gods will favor you. Each line resonates strangely with your daily work. Even as a scribe, it is easy to grow impatient, to wish the reeds were sharper, the ink flowed faster, or the papyrus smoother. But the text reminds you to slow down, to embrace the rhythm of repetition, the discipline that preserves not only words, but society itself. Your reed scratches delicately across the fibers, and you notice the slight aroma of ink mingling with the faint scent of lotus from the courtyard garden. The repetition of hieroglyphs becomes almost hypnotic. Time stretches. The world beyond the temple walls seems distant, reduced to soft noises and faint heat. The scratching of other reeds, the shuffle of sandals, even the hum of cicadas outside fades into a lullaby of productivity. Occasionally, you pause to reread a line, ensuring that every stroke is faithful to the original. Errors in wisdom texts are less immediately dangerous than mistakes in contracts or tax records, yet they carry their own weight. A misplaced glyph could distort meaning, and centuries from now, a scholar might wonder if the ancient scribe was careless or witty. You adjust your pen and continue, slow and steady, savoring the discipline of perfection. Your mind drifts briefly to the students you once taught or trained alongside. Some were impatient, eager to move beyond repetition into real work. Others lingered, soaking in every detail, reveling in the meditative quality of the craft. You remember the quiet pride of your master when your copy matched the exemplar perfectly. Your curves, angles, and spacing aligned exactly. The satisfaction is subtle but enduring, like the gentle weight of the Nile against its banks. A mischievous thought intrudes. You consider whether the gods themselves might peek over your shoulder. Would Thoth, god of writing and wisdom, notice the tiny flourish of a cat in the margin? Would he smirk or shake his head at the audacity? Perhaps the idea is comforting, a small audience of divine witnesses to your quiet labor. You dip your reed into black ink again and continue, letting each line flow in rhythm with your steady breathing. The chamber grows quieter as shadows lengthen. Fewer scribes remain. Some have left for evening chores, others have taken brief rest in shaded corners. You feel a sense of solitude that is not loneliness. It is the companionship of work, the communion between hand, ink, and papyrus. Each glyph is a bridge across time, a conversation with ancestors and descendants alike. You pause to stretch, noticing the familiar stiffness in your fingers and wrists. The repetitive motion, hours of focus, the tension of responsibility, all weigh heavily. Yet there is a comfort in knowing your labor is enduring. Your work, though invisible to most, forms the backbone of Egypt's culture. Grain, letters, contracts, wisdom, each relies on the careful hand of scribes. Without you, the machinery falters. With you, it flows, steady as the Nile itself. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory in the margins of wisdom texts, subtle personal notes hidden among the prescribed advice. One ancient scribe wrote, "Patience is the pen's friend, and ink its companion," and you think of how perfectly this sums up your day. Perhaps centuries from now, someone will find a line from you, not in official letters, but in a private flourish, and smile at the thought that even a disciplined scribe can be playful. You resume writing, dipping the reed carefully, letting the rhythm of copying wash over you. Each line is a meditation, each glyph a small triumph over impermanence. The world outside continues in chaos and motion, but here, in the chamber, there is order, balance, and the quiet pulse of ink on papyrus. Evening creeps slowly over the temple, softening the harsh lines of limestone walls with a gentle golden hue. The air cools, and the chatter outside quiets into a murmur. You return to your bench, the papyrus stack beside you, and prepare for another task. Today, it is the recording of temple offerings, a sacred duty, neither as ephemeral as a grain tally, nor as lyrical as hymns, yet vital to the spiritual heartbeat of the city. You lay a fresh sheet of papyrus across the bench, its fibers catching the fading light. The ink jar sits ready, black and glossy, promising permanence with each dip of your reed. You breathe in, exhaling slowly, feeling the familiar tension in your shoulders ease as you prepare to work. Offering lists are precise. Quantities, types of food, livestock, and other gifts that sustain the priests, feed the gods, and honor the dead. Accuracy is paramount. Mainstream fact, temple offerings were meticulously recorded by scribes. These included bread, beer, fruits, vegetables, incense, animals, and sometimes finely crafted items like jewelry or small statues. Records ensured priests received what they were owed and allowed the pharaoh and temple officials to monitor abundance or scarcity. Without scribes, even the sacred rituals could falter. You dip your reed into the ink and begin, listing the loaves, jugs of beer, and offerings of fruit. Each line is deliberate, the glyphs precise. The reed scratches softly against the papyrus, a soothing accompaniment to the distant murmur of the river outside. The rhythm of your work is hypnotic, each stroke both deliberate and meditative. A quirky tidbit, some scribes occasionally added tiny sketches of animals among the offerings, cats, birds, or even mythological creatures like serpents or baboons thought to bring luck or protection to the items. You consider adding a small ibis in the margin, a nod to Thoth, patron of writing. It feels irreverent yet harmless, a private wink to the divine. Historians still argue whether such drawings were meant as magical symbols or mere scribal amusement. Either interpretation fascinates you. Perhaps the ibis you sketch will survive millennia as a symbol of luck, or perhaps it will be dismissed as nothing more than a doodle. Either way, it feels satisfying to leave a trace of your personality within the formal record. The offerings include livestock, ducks, ducks, and geese. You carefully list each, noting quantities and condition. The priests take these animals seriously. They are both sustenance and sacred symbols. You imagine the careful hands of priests later inspecting each creature, ensuring that the ritual purity matches the meticulous record you have prepared. You pause, flexing your fingers. The repetitive motion strains your wrists and shoulders, yet the act of writing offers its own reward, the gentle meditation of order emerging from chaos. Your ink flows steadily, and the papyrus gradually fills with neat rows of glyphs. Outside, the evening wind drifts through, carrying the faint aroma of cooking fires and lotus blooms. The temple garden seems alive with the quiet rustle of leaves, the distant croak of frogs, the occasional cry of a bird settling in for the night. A fellow scribe glances over, noting your careful work. He murmurs a joke about how the geese you just recorded will probably escape before reaching the altar. You chuckle softly, imagining a temple full of runaway geese causing chaos during evening ceremonies. It is a comforting distraction, a moment of levity in a day otherwise dominated by duty. As the list grows, you reflect on the broader significance of your task. Each loaf, each jug, each animal, though mundane in isolation, forms a bridge between mortals and the divine. The offerings maintain the cosmic balance, according to belief. A gift to the gods ensures the continuation of life, fertility of the land, and favor for the pharaoh. Your ink, steady and deliberate, becomes the medium through which these relationships are preserved. You dip your reed again, noting the subtle change in the flow of ink. The reed has softened slightly from use, its fibers bending just enough to make each glyph uniquely yours. You pause to trim it, ensuring each line remains crisp and legible. The act is repetitive but necessary. Your handiwork must endure. Another quirky detail crosses your mind. Some scribes would record tiny errors intentionally, tiny corrections or smudges that allowed them to claim divine inspiration had subtly intervened. You consider doing the same, smudging a small stroke slightly as if the gods themselves had adjusted your hand. You resist, smiling quietly at the thought. Perhaps someday an archaeologist will see your perfectly clean list and conclude you are a flawless scribe. Your little secret will remain hidden in the fibers. Historians still argue whether scribes overseeing temple offerings had spiritual authority or were simply clerical functionaries. Some sources suggest they enjoyed prestige equivalent to priests, while others claim their power was practical, limited to documentation. You feel both sides. The duty feels sacred, yet it is undeniably bureaucratic. Both roles converge here in your hand, flowing through your reed onto papyrus. As evening deepens, the temple quiets further. The last priests depart, leaving only a few novices sweeping floors and the distant gurgle of the river. You finish your final lines, inspecting the list carefully. Each quantity matches the tally sheets, each glyph stands precise. Satisfied, you set the papyrus aside, knowing that tomorrow, or perhaps next week, it will be read aloud, checked, and perhaps even copied once more. Your work will ripple through the temple and beyond, subtle yet essential. You rise slowly, stretching your tired limbs. The chamber feels peaceful now, bathed in warm, fading light. The reed, the ink, and the papyrus rest quietly, companions through another day of service, precision, and quiet endurance. Outside, the Nile reflects the sunset, and you take a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of work and life settle around you like a soft blanket. The temple is quiet now, the golden light fading into the soft blues and purples of twilight. You linger at your bench for a moment, letting the calm settle around you. Outside, the distant chatter of the marketplace has faded, replaced by the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. Even the river seems to slow, the ripples moving languidly, as if the world itself is preparing for rest. You pick up a fresh sheet of papyrus, ready for the next task, recording scribal exercises for the novices. These exercises are less weighty than contracts or offerings, yet they are crucial. The future of Egypt's bureaucracy, its grain accounting, its sacred rituals, depends on students mastering the art of writing. Today, you will copy model sentences, phrases, and passages designed to teach precision, clarity, and discipline. Each stroke guides a hand that may one day govern records, copy legal text, or preserve hymns. Your responsibility extends far beyond the chamber. A mainstream fact, scribal schools, or perank, trained young boys, often of middle or upper-class backgrounds, to become literate in hieroglyphs, hieratic, and sometimes even demotic scripts. Education was rigorous, with students spending hours repeating glyphs, copying texts, and memorizing teachings. Mistakes were corrected repeatedly, sometimes painfully, by more senior scribes or masters. You begin with the first set of exercises. Short sentences teaching ethical conduct and practical wisdom. Be humble in speech, you write, tracing each glyph deliberately. Do not boast of your skill, the next line advises. Your hand moves in rhythm with your breath, the scratching of the reed a soft accompaniment to the gathering twilight. A quirky detail enters your mind. Some scribal exercises included humorous or absurd sentences, presumably to make repetition more bearable. You've seen examples where a pupil is instructed to write, "Do not chase goats into the granary," or "Do not let your sandals drink the beer." These nonsensical phrases amuse both teacher and student, breaking the monotony while reinforcing technique. You smile at the thought, imagining the novices laughing quietly as they copy, careful not to smudge their ink. Historians still debate whether these humorous sentences were widespread or confined to particular schools. Some evidence suggests they were rare and localized, meant as mnemonic devices, while other fragments hint at a broader tradition of playful instruction. Either way, they remind you that even the most disciplined practice can include sparks of levity. You continue, guiding your reed across the papyrus as the novices practice nearby. You glance at their work, gently correcting strokes, praising neatness, and quietly nudging those who grow frustrated. One boy struggles with the intricate glyph for a seated man, his reed shaking slightly. You lean over, whisper a tip, and he nods, his hand steadier now. There is satisfaction in this small triumph, a quiet joy in shaping the hands that will one day sustain Egypt's written legacy. The exercises include repetitive practice of numbers and common phrases used in daily accounting. You copy alongside the students, a subtle demonstration of technique and patience. Your own hand aches from the long day, but this work is meditative, a rhythm of ink flowing across fibers, each glyph a small testament to discipline and continuity. Outside, the river reflects the deepening sky, shimmering with the faintest hints of stars. The wind carries the aroma of lotus and cooking fires, and you inhale slowly, letting the world's softness mingle with the precise rhythm of your work. Even as a scribe, you are not separate from the life of the city, the river, or the temple. Your hand connects the two, the mundane and the eternal, the practical and the divine. A quirky habit surfaces. Sometimes, when a novice falters, you draw a tiny symbolic animal in the margin, a bird, a cat, a little Nile fish, to encourage him subtly. Perhaps he notices, perhaps he does not. In centuries to come, archaeologists may find the marks and puzzle over their meaning, unaware that they were encouragements hidden in ink. You pause to dip your reed in ink again, the tip glistening. Each line of text builds not only skill, but also patience. Hours of repetition teach more than technique. They cultivate focus, humility, and endurance. Watching the novices, you feel a gentle pride. These children, their hands learning the same scratches and curves, will one day carry Egypt's civilization forward. You are their silent guide, an invisible hand shaping the future. The chamber is quiet now, save for the soft scratch of reeds, the occasional whisper of correction, and the faint murmur of wind through the open door. Shadows stretch across the floor, curling around the benches and papyri. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the western horizon, and the first stars glimmer faintly in the sky. There is a meditative quality to this transition, a bridge between the labor of the day and the calm of night. You finish the final lines of the exercises, checking each glyph for consistency. The novices glance at your work, their own lines neat and disciplined. You nod approvingly, letting them absorb the subtle lesson that writing is not merely copying symbols, but cultivating patience, clarity, and even a touch of artistry. Finally, you lean back, flexing tired fingers and wrists. The day has been long, but the quiet satisfaction of enduring, shaping, and preserving lingers. Outside, the city moves toward evening. Lights glow faintly in houses, lamps flicker along the riverbank, and the occasional laughter drifts from a distant courtyard. Within the temple, the scribal chamber rests in gentle order, the rhythm of ink on papyrus marking another day in the life of a scribe. Night drapes its quiet over the temple. The sky, a deep indigo, glimmers faintly with stars that will guide travelers along the Nile in the hours to come. You sit at your bench, the chamber bathed in soft lamplight, shadows flickering gently against the walls. The day's work has slowed. Most scribes have departed, leaving only a few of you to finish the final tasks. You breathe deeply, stretching your shoulders and wrists, then pick up your reed once more for one last set of records. This evening, your task is unusual yet oddly soothing. You are to copy a compilation of personal reflections left by an elder scribe, advice on writing, discipline, and patience. It is neither legal nor sacred in the conventional sense, but it is a mirror into the mind of someone who has spent a lifetime tracing ink across papyrus. You anticipate a rhythm of words that is quieter, more introspective, a meditation within a day of labor. Personal notes and reflections of scribes occasionally survive in fragmentary form on ostraca or scraps of papyrus. These texts, though informal, offer historians insight into the daily lives, thoughts, and concerns of those who were literate in ancient Egypt. They provide context beyond official documents and illuminate the personality behind the practiced hand. You begin copying, the reed scratching softly in the quiet. The elder's words speak of patience. Let the reed move slowly, and the glyphs will align with the order of the universe. Each line is simple yet profound, guiding both technique and temperament. You trace the glyphs carefully, letting the words sink into your mind as your hand moves rhythmically over the papyrus. A quirky detail, some scribes included small comments to themselves in the margins. Do not spill ink on sacred papyrus. Or, remember to laugh, even at mistakes. You smile quietly, imagining that humor crossing the centuries, small glimpses of personality that survive hidden within otherwise solemn sheets. You add a tiny flourish, a little wisp of ink curling from the last glyph, as a nod to this tradition. Historians still debate whether such personal notes were truly contemplative or simply mnemonic devices, written to guide technique or remember certain conventions. Either interpretation fits the mood of the evening: the quiet focus, the gentle hand, the meditative rhythm of ink flowing steadily across fibers. The elder's text continues with reminders about discipline, about observing nature for inspiration, about studying the Nile, the stars, and the human hand with equal attention. You trace each glyph thoughtfully, letting the cadence of the sentences guide your own focus. Writing is more than copying. It is learning to inhabit patience itself, to let precision become a form of meditation. You glance briefly at the window. The Nile shimmers faintly, reflecting the starlight. You imagine the water's slow, endless flow mirrored in the steady scratch of your reed. Outside, nocturnal creatures stir. Frogs croak, and the distant call of an ibis drifts faintly in the warm night air. There is a harmony here, a connection between the rhythm of life, the movement of water, and the deliberate motion of your hand. Scribes often joked quietly with one another through tiny marks or marginal notes, as if leaving secret messages for future readers. Perhaps this elder once slipped a joke in his own margins, a tiny rebellion against the rigidity of daily labor. You trace your reed carefully, imagining that small humor hidden among the wisdom of decades. You pause to flex your hand, noting the lingering fatigue in your fingers and wrist. The day's work has been long. Grain tallies, letters, legal documents, temple offerings, wisdom texts, and scribal exercises. Yet this final task is gentle, contemplative, allowing the mind to wander while the hand maintains discipline. You feel the rhythm settle in your chest, a steady pulse echoing the river, the stars, and the quiet life of the temple. The elder's reflections touch on legacy. Ink survives where flesh fades, the words read. What you write endures beyond your breath, beyond your sleep, beyond your forgetting. You trace the glyphs slowly, imagining future hands unfolding your own papyri, reading your carefully measured lines, wondering at the life behind the strokes. There is a strange comfort in this permanence, a gentle reassurance that your work matters in ways beyond immediate recognition. You let your thoughts wander, recalling earlier moments of the day, the sharp smell of fresh papyrus, the warmth of midday bread and beer, the sound of children laughing in distant courtyards, the whisper of wind through lotus leaves. Each memory is captured, layered with the physical act of writing, embedding both action and reflection into the fibers beneath your hand. Squirky tidbit comes to mind. Scribes sometimes left personal remarks in highly stylized scripts that would be indecipherable to ordinary readers, visible only to those trained in nuance and form. Perhaps a future archaeologist will smile at your hidden wisp of ink, recognizing a playful echo of your fatigue and satisfaction. The chamber darkens further as night deepens. The flame of your lamp flickers softly, casting dancing shadows across the walls and papyri. You finish the last line, trace a final flourish, and lay down your reed. A gentle hush settles over the room, a quiet acknowledgement of a day's end, of work completed, of patience honored. Outside, the river whispers, the stars burn softly, and the temple seems to breathe along with you. You rise slowly, stretching stiff muscles and rolling your shoulders. Each sheet of papyrus represents hours of labor, discipline, humor, and contemplation. Your hand, though tired, feels steady and satisfied. Tomorrow will bring more tasks, more ink, more papyrus. Yet tonight there is a calm contentment in the enduring rhythm of your craft. The temple is hushed now, bathed in the soft silver of moonlight filtering through open slits in the limestone walls. The day has faded into memory, leaving only the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the faint scratching of reeds drying beside ink jars, and the distant whisper of the Nile as it flows steadily toward the delta. Tonight, your final task is both familiar and intimate, reviewing the day's work, noting details, and preparing papyri for storage. Each sheet is a record of labor, observation, and care, and it deserves careful handling before it rests in the archive. You begin with the grain tallies, stacking them neatly and ensuring every figure is legible. Your hands, though sore, move methodically, brushing away stray dust and smoothing curled edges. The accuracy of these lists carries weight beyond the day. Disputes may arise, shipments will be checked, and the pharaoh's officials may call upon these records. Your careful attention ensures that no error will mar the permanence of your ink. Ancient Egyptian archives preserved thousands of records, from grain tallies to tax receipts, legal contracts, and temple inventories. Scribes were the keepers of memory, responsible for translating fleeting daily activity into enduring documentation. Without these efforts, the complex machinery of Egyptian society would falter. Next, you handle letters and legal documents, checking seals, tidying edges, and stacking them according to protocol. Couriers will carry the letters, while contracts will be stored for reference in disputes. Each papyrus is a bridge between people, between responsibilities, between generations. You feel a subtle satisfaction in your role as both guardian and transmitter of information. A quirky thought flits through your mind. Someone may unroll these papyri and imagine the scribe who wrote them, perhaps even misinterpret a doodle or flourish as a sacred symbol. You smile quietly, picturing an archaeologist puzzled over a tiny sketch of a walking grain sack or a playful cat in the margins. Time may distort the intent, but the trace of personality remains. Historians still argue how much autonomy scribes truly had in arranging and annotating records. Some suggest they followed strict templates, while others posit that creative judgment occasionally shaped the appearance and organization of documents. Your own small choices, how neatly to align figures, where to leave space for notes, reflect the quiet exercise of judgment even within routine labor. The temple offerings, carefully recorded earlier, receive particular attention. You inspect each line: loaves, jars of beer, vegetables, animals. The priest's expectations are exacting, and your role is to ensure that the records reflect the sacred reality. Accuracy here is a form of devotion, an indirect offering to gods who may or may not notice the precise stroke of your reed. You pause briefly, stretching your back and fingers. Moonlight glints off the papyrus fibers, highlighting the small imperfections, the tiny flourishes, the human touch that underlies every document. You recall the wisdom texts you copied, the scribal exercises, and the elders' reflections. Each was a lesson in patience, precision, and humility, teaching not only technique, but also the quiet endurance of daily labor. A whimsical memory surfaces, that small doodle of a cat chasing a fish in the margin of the wisdom copy. It feels like a companion, a private joke preserved in ink. You smile and imagine it enduring alongside your serious tallies, letters, and contracts, proof that even the most disciplined work can carry moments of levity. Historians still debate whether scribes experienced significant social prestige or were mostly functionaries. Your experience suggests both. Your labor is indispensable, yet often invisible, noticed only when errors occur. There is a quiet nobility in this invisibility, a recognition that your craft supports society without fanfare. With the documents prepared, you move to the final act, securing the papyri for storage. Sheets are stacked carefully, tied, and sometimes pressed with weights to keep them flat. You imagine them resting in cool, dark rooms, waiting for someone to unroll them in years or centuries. Your hand lingers over the stacks for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of their importance and the effort embedded in each line of ink. Now, as the night deepens and the chamber grows still, your thoughts turn inward. You feel the satisfaction of work completed, the subtle pride in a day spent fully within your craft. The world beyond the temple fades into quiet murmurings, the Nile gliding in steady rhythm, a distant dog barking, the occasional owl calling softly. Even as activity slows, the traces of your labor remain, silently connecting past, present, and future. You set down your reed and stretch slowly, feeling the ache of a long day softened by the calm of accomplishment. Your gaze drifts to the river outside, the silver reflection undisturbed by wind or boat. The night embraces the temple, folding it into quiet and rest. Now the day is truly ending, and you feel a gentle release in your body. The ink-stained fingers relax, the wrist eases, and your eyes soften as they trace the stacks of papyri one final time. Everything is in order, yet the very act of pausing allows your mind to drift. Perhaps a soft sigh escapes your lips as you imagine the river gliding endlessly, the stars twinkling in distant patterns unchanged for centuries. The world outside moves at its own rhythm, but within this chamber, stillness wraps around you like a warm, familiar blanket. You breathe slowly, letting each exhale carry away the tension of long hours spent in meticulous care. The scratching of reeds, the scent of ink, the texture of papyrus, all the small details that consumed your day fade into memory. They remain tucked away in your mind, like a lullaby, gentle and reassuring. It is a comfort to know that your work persists beyond the immediate moment. Each line of ink, each careful glyph, every small flourish has a life of its own, preserved in sand and stone, carrying your presence silently into the future. The world outside the temple is quiet, yet your contribution echoes softly within it, a hidden pulse that keeps society, ritual, and culture in gentle motion. Let your thoughts wander slowly, like the Nile at night. Imagine the stars above reflecting in your inked sheets, the soft sound of distant frogs, the wind rustling lotus leaves. The day is done, and the night carries you toward rest, carrying with it the gentle satisfaction of labor completed, of purpose fulfilled, of patience practiced. Sleep now flows as steadily as your ink across papyrus, as calmly as the river outside. Close your eyes, let the world soften, and rest in the quiet endurance of your day. End of script. Sweet dreams.